Shocking revelation, why Paul claimed he was a slave at 3 a.m. The truth will haunt you. It was 3 a.m. when Paul burst into the tiny diner, eyes wild and hair damp with sweat. The bell above the door chimed an eerie tune, as if warning everyone inside that something was very wrong. He gasped for breath, his voice a frantic whisper, "I'm not who you think I am." Patrons turned their heads in shock, faces pale under the flickering fluorescent lights. What had Paul experienced? And why did he insist he was a slave? As murmurs filled the air, the waitress dropped the plates she was carrying, the sound crashing like thunder. The noise echoed, weaving through the crowd like a spine-chilling warning. They all knew Paul, normal guy, always friendly, but this was different. He was trembling, soaked in fear, and the room thickened with tension like storm clouds ready to break. Pushing closer, they listened intently. Paul spoke of chains that rattled in his dreams, of a voice that called him by a different name. He gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white, as if the words would slip away if he weren't careful. "They want me back," he exclaimed, eyes darting to the empty booths, paranoia escalating. Shadows clung to the walls, and a chill crept up spines, leaving everyone on edge. Then came the details that sent a shiver down everyone's back. "I saw them in the mirror, I felt their breath." His face twisted in horror, a lump forming in his throat. "Faces from another time, staring back at me." Gasps rang out, and the air thickened like fog rolling in. Everyone could feel the weight of his words pressing on their chests. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The room felt like it was closing in, the fear palpable. People exchanged glances, eyebrows raised in disbelief mixed with fascination. The diner's lights flickered again, leaving them in darkness momentarily. When they returned, Paul was gone. The disbelief morphed into panic, hearts pounding in synchronized fear. Where had he gone? What had he unleashed? The whispers surged again, growing louder, more desperate. "Did you see his face? He was terrified. What does it mean?" The words floated in the air, unresolved questions wrapping around their minds like a tight knot, but there was something more. What lay behind Paul's terrifying revelation? And as they stood there, eyes darting around the empty diner, they couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was far more haunting than they could ever imagine. The diner was plunged into an unsettling stillness. The kind that seeps into your bones and wraps your heart in a vice. Murmurs fluttered like bad news. The waitress, still standing frozen with the remnants of her dropped plates scattered around her feet, broke that silence. "Someone has to go find Paul," she whispered, her voice trembling. A man at the far end of the counter, Steve, who had always thought of Paul as a solid friend, stood up, the adrenaline racing through his veins. "I'll go," he offered, his voice stronger than he felt. He pushed through the doorway, the bell chiming ominously as he stepped into the cool night, the air strangely thick as if warning him of something lurking just beyond the thin veil of reality. Outside, the street was dark, save for the flickering streetlights creating an uneven canvas of shadows. Steve glanced around nervously, memories of Paul's haunting words echoing in his mind. What did he mean by, "They want me back"? He shook his head, trying to dismiss the unsettling thoughts. Paul had always been a jokester, but this was different. That he moved down the street, ears straining for any sign of his friend. The night felt alive in an eerie way. The rustling leaves whispered secrets, and the distant hooting of an owl sent chills down his spine. He stumbled upon an alleyway, the shadows appearing deeper, menacing even. "Paul," he called out, his voice swallowed by the darkness, then, a whisper. "Help me." It was faint, like a memory brushing against the edges of his mind. Steve's heart raced. Was that Paul? He stepped into the alley, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he pressed on, compelled by a mix of fear and loyalty. Behind a crumbling dumpster, an old mirror lay tilted on its side. Glinting under the dim glow of a nearby street lamp, Steve felt drawn to it. As he approached, the air around him felt charged, electric. The surface of the mirror was murky, but as he got closer, shapes began to emerge, faces shifting within the glass. His breath hitched. They were distorted and anguished, eyes pleading for a salvation that felt centuries old. "Paul! Are you in there?" he shouted, panic rising. The faces in the mirror turned toward him, mouths moving silently, screaming something he could not hear. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind whooshed down the alley, sending a shiver coursing through Steve. Then all at once, the shadows deepened, and the world around him warped. He staggered backward, fear wrapping around his throat like a noose. As he fought to regain his balance, he heard it again, that same voice, stronger now. "Come back, Paul, come back." Steve turned and bolted, his feet pounding on the pavement, heart racing as he fled the alley. The diner loomed ahead, and he pushed through the door, breathless. The patrons stared, their faces a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The waitress looked at him, hope and fear battling in her eyes. "Did you find him?" she asked, breath hitching in her throat. "No," he gasped, still reeling from what he had seen. But something's not right. The mirror, it was alive. Silence blanketed the room once more. The lights flickered ominously overhead, shadows dancing against the walls. The patrons leaned in, hungry for answers, but all Steve could offer were wide eyes and a pounding heart, because deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. A chilling thought struck him. What if Paul wasn't just lost? What if he had been taken? And what darkness lay in wait? As the realization settled in the air like a thick fog, the diner's door swung open again. A figure stepped inside, cloaked in shadows, eyes glinting under the fluorescent lights. It wasn't Paul. And they were looking for him. The figure paused just inside the diner, silhouetted by the light spilling through the open door. A collective shiver traveled through the patrons, tightening the air even further. Steve squinted, trying to make out the features of the newcomer, but the shadows clung to them like a shroud. "Who are you?" Steve demanded, his voice edged with a mix of authority he didn't feel and the urgency of the moment. The figure stepped forward, revealing a face half hidden beneath a dark hood. "I am here for Paul," the figure said, voice low and smooth, like velvet laced with malice. "He belongs to us." A gasp rippled through the diner. The waitress, clutching the edge of the counter, flexed her fingers as if she sought strength from the wood. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Someone who understands the price of loyalty," the stranger replied, stepping further into the harsh light. Their eyes, dark and piercing, bore into each person in the diner, pulling the tension taut. In the light, Steve could see a small emblem glinting on the figure's chest, a broken chain. He was never meant to leave. The words hung heavy in the air, dripping with menace. The realization struck like ice water cascading over Steve's spine. Paul's claims, the cryptic warnings, they were all echoing a sinister truth. A truth that involved more than mere friendship or betrayal. "What do you mean?" Steve demanded, his courage teetering. "Paul's my friend. You can't take him." The figure leaned closer, the air around them pulsating with a strange energy. "He is caught between worlds, a pawn in a game far beyond your understanding. You think friendship can save him? It's deeper than that." The stranger straightened, a cruel smile creeping across their lips. "To take him back is to reclaim what was stolen. You cannot hold on to what was never yours." Steve fought to process the implications. "What are you talking about? You're saying he's part of something horrible?" "Horrible doesn't begin to cover it," the figure responded, their voice laced with dark humor. "But it doesn't matter. The decision lies with you, Steve. You can let him drown in the shadows or you can stand against destiny. But be warned, the cost may be greater than you can imagine." Suddenly, the booth behind Steve exploded into chaos. A plate shattered, a glass cracked, panic surged as patrons jumped, hearts racing. The figure's presence seemed to ripple through the room, distorting faces into masks of fear. "Leave him alone!" a voice shouted, shattering the paralyzing silence. Steve turned to see an older man, a regular at the diner, standing with his fists clenched. Fear and anger twisted his features, but Steve could see the vulnerability behind the bravado. "He's just a kid. You can't take him." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the diner. "You think you can protect what you do not understand? The shadows will come for him, one way or another." As the words settled like lead in the room, Steve's mind raced. Was it true? Could friendship really save Paul? Or was he entrapped in forces beyond their reach? The figure took a step back, eyes sweeping over the frightened crowd. "Time is not on your side," they said, their tone a warning as they melted back into the shadows. "You have until dawn to decide, or the chain might just tighten around Paul's throat." With that, they vanished like a wisp of smoke, leaving behind an icy silence and a sense of impending dread. The few who dared to breathe exchanged horrified glances, and then Steve felt the weight of their fear settling upon him. "What do we do?" someone asked, their voice trembling. The waitress wiped a tear from her cheek, eyes wide with terror. "We have to find Paul," she said, determination breaking through the fear. Steve nodded, feeling the urgency bloom in his chest. He couldn't let his friends succumb to whatever nightmare awaited him. But what did they even stand against? The mirror's silent screams, the figure's cryptic warning, and now an enemy they couldn't see. It all spiraled into a tempest of confusion. "Let us go," Steve said, a resolve hardening in his gut. "We have to get to him before it's too late." As they rushed out of the diner, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon, one chilling thought clouded Steve's mind: what if they were too late? But in the back of his mind, a darker question lingered: was Paul ever truly free to begin with? As the streets beckoned once more, the shadows whispered secrets meant only for those willing to listen, and the time for listening drew near. The darkness clung to the streets like a shroud, thick with tension. Steve's heart raced as he led the group through the dim light of dawn. Each step felt weighted, like his feet sank into the ground, dragging him down along with the realization that something sinister hovered over them all. "Where do we even start?" the waitress asked, her voice small, filled with uncertainty. She glanced around as if the shadows might spring back to life and swallow them whole. "We find Paul," Steve replied, each word etched with determination. He couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The urgency to track down his friend pulsed like a drum in his veins, driving him forward. They rushed toward Paul's last known hangout, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Steve could already see the peeling paint and shattered windows looming ahead. The place had been a playground for kids, a place for late-night explorations, but now, in the dim light, it seemed more like a tomb. When they reached the entrance, Steve hesitated. A tight knot formed in his stomach. He could feel the shadows crawling along the ground, lurking around the corners. "Maybe we should call the cops," someone suggested, breaking the stillness. "Not if this is as serious as that figure implied," Steve shot back. "If Paul is in danger, we can't waste time." "Not when he could be." He couldn't finish the thought. What if the figure was right? What if Paul was part of something darker, caught in a web they didn't understand? As they forced the door open, a sharp creak echoed out, sending an uninvited shiver racing down Steve's spine. The inside was dark and oppressive. Sunlight barely broke through cracks in the walls. Dust motes danced in the air like tiny specters, and the silence was almost deafening. "Paul!" Steve called out, his voice breaking through the stillness. The group held their breath, listening for a reply. But only silence answered. "Maybe check upstairs," the waitress suggested, her voice trembling. With unease crawling in his gut, Steve nodded and climbed the steps, each creak under his feet amplifying his anxiety. As they reached the top, the landing opened into a vast room. Old machinery lay scattered, a graveyard of rusting metal, and then he saw a flickering light at the far end. A single lamp illuminated a figure huddled in the corner. Relief washed over him as he recognized Paul's familiar silhouette. "Paul!" Steve shouted again, running forward. But the closer he got, the more he understood something was off. Paul was hunched over, trembling, a look of terror etched across his features, as though he had seen things too terrible to bear. "Get away!" Paul shouted, looking up in panic. "You don't understand. What is happening?" Steve demanded, reaching for his friend. "We're here to help you." Paul recoiled like a wounded animal. "No. You have to listen, it's not safe here. They'll come for you too, they." The word slipped out like an icy breath, chilling the room. Paul's eyes darted to an unseen corner, growing wider with fear. "They are always watching, a loud crash echoed from the doorway behind them. The group spun around, hearts thrumming in their chests. The menacing figure re-emerged from the shadows, grin twisted and eyes glinting with malice. "Did you really think you could stop what's coming?" The finality of their words hung in the air, thickening the anxiety surrounding them. In that moment, Steve's heart sank. The shadows weren't just lurking, they were closing in. "Paul!" he yelled, desperate for answers, but the terrified look in Paul's eyes was all he needed to know. They were swimming in a tide of darkness they couldn't hope to escape from. As the shadows began to flicker, merging into a swirling mass, Steve felt a cold hand grasp his throat, squeezing tight. Without thinking, he lunged for Paul, yanking him back. "We have to go. Now." But would they make it out alive? What horrors awaited them in the encroaching darkness? One question lingered in his mind as they rushed toward the exit: what had Paul done to attract such relentless danger? The break of dawn felt distant, an unreachable ideal as a predatory laugh echoed behind them. Some chains were meant to bind, but would they break theirs in time? The echoes of that predatory laugh hung in the air like a noxious fog, twisting Steve's stomach into knots. He yanked Paul back, his grip on him firm and urgent. "We can't just stand here. We have to move." They charged through the doorway, heartbeats pounding in rhythm with their frantic footsteps. Behind them, the shadows gathered, pulling tighter, almost as if they could reach out and ensnare them. "Where do we go?" the waitress yelled, her voice quivering. She glanced back, fear etched into every feature. "Downstairs. We'll find an exit," Steve shouted, glancing over his shoulder. The figure from the shadows stood, a monstrous silhouette against the flickering light. "You can run, but they will still find you." The voice dripped with malice, each word a knife in the air. They barreled down the stairs, the creaking wood beneath them groaning in protest. Steve could barely breathe. Paul stumbled, falling against the railing. "Wait!" he gasped, pulling himself upright. "The truth, you don't know." "Not now, Paul." Steve gritted his teeth, shoving the door open to the ground floor. Outside, the early morning light struggled to break through the histogram of dark clouds looming overhead. "Trust me," Paul pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "I need you to understand what I've been, what I've become." Steve turned to Paul, that familiar feeling of dread washing over him again. "What do you mean?" Paul's eyes darted, wild and panicked. "They're not just shadows. They're part of something bigger. I made a deal." A thunderous crash interrupted them as the wall collapsed behind him, heavy bricks tumbling down. The monstrous figure burst through the dust, its contorted grin gleaming as the light flickered. "Enough!" it roared, voice booming through the debris. "You cannot escape your fate. Keep moving!" Steve yelled, dragging Paul toward a side exit, adrenaline fueling his every step. The waitress followed closely, her breath hitching in fear. Just as they edged towards the door, Paul stopped abruptly. "You have to hear me." Steve shook his head, urgency surging through his veins. "In a minute. Just focus on getting out. But Paul's gaze hardened. You don't understand what's at stake. I thought I could control it, but they need to feed. They come for souls, and Steve surged forward, desperation adhering to him like sweat. No. We don't have time. We'll talk when we're outside. But a hollow laugh echoed again, reverberating against the walls. You will never escape. You're already bound to us to him. The figure lunged forward, arms outstretched, shadows trailing behind like claws. Steve squeezed Paul's shoulder, pushing him toward the exit. Run! They barreled through the doorway, tumbling into the cool morning air. For a fleeting moment, Steve was blinded by the sun's harsh rays, the world around him blurring as he tried to process the escape. But darkness seemed to push out from the warehouse, seeping into the edges of their reality. Paul staggered as the heaviness in the air clawed at him. We can't hide forever. I know. Steve snapped, heart racing. Where do we go? Paul opened his mouth, pulling in a shaky breath, but then abruptly froze. His eyes widened, dread washing over his face. They're coming. They never leave. We need to find shelter somewhere they can't reach us. The waitress's voice broke through Steve's panic. What about the church? It's closed, but they say it's holy ground. Then that's where we go. With no time to waste, they sprinted towards the church, pulse racing as the shadows seemed to swirl just behind them, but even as they ran, a chilling thought struck deep: what if the church was just a bigger trap? The darkness was closing in, relentless in its pursuit. Could they find salvation in the sanctuary or doom themselves even further? All hope rested in Paul's secret, but would it be the key to their survival or their destruction? As they raced toward the church, the air thickened, suffocating them with an overwhelming dread. Every step Steve took felt like running through molasses, as if the shadows behind were actively trying to drag them back. The echoes of chaos faded, replaced by a sharp focus on the looming church ahead. It's just a building. The waitress shouted, her voice cracking under pressure. What if it's not safe? Steve shot her a glance, sweat beading on his forehead. It's better than standing here. We can't afford to hesitate. Paul's eyes darted around frantically, scanning for any sign of their pursuer. I don't think they can cross onto holy ground. But we need to get inside. Now. With urgency fueling their every motion, they slammed against the church doors, the heavy wood creaking under their frantic push. The air felt charged, a subtle vibration swirling around them as they stumbled into the sanctuary. The light was dim, filtered through stained glass that cast distorted patterns on the floor, flickering like the dying heartbeat of hope. Lock it. Steve hissed, leaning against the door as Paul pulled it shut. The waitress barely managed to shove a nearby wooden bench against it before collapsing to the floor, panting for air. What now? She gasped, glancing back toward the door. The world outside seemed unnaturally still, the shadows lurking just beyond. Paul drew in a deep breath, his face pale and drawn. We need to talk. The truth I should have told you sooner. Save it, Steve interrupted, his heart racing too fast for rational thought. We're safe for now. He turned to the waitress, who was glancing nervously at Paul. Let's just catch our breath. Safe. Paul breathed, shaking his head. You think we're safe? They're not just going to wait for us to relax. The church protects the place, sure, but it won't stop them forever. Then what do we do? You said something about a deal. Paul looked toward the altar, a troubled expression crossing his face. I made a pact with them. They need souls, and I thought I could manipulate it. But now, it's beyond my control. You're saying this is your fault? Steve shot back, voice low and furious. I was trying to protect us. I thought I could control it. Paul exclaimed, hands shaking and voice teetering on the edge of panic. But they want me, and by extending my life, I've invoked their wrath on the rest of you. I swear I didn't mean it. The waitress's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding dawning. You're saying they need you to feed? Yes. But I am not the only target. They won't stop until they have what they're owed. A sudden loud thud echoed through the sanctuary, jolting them all. They turned, seeing cracked spiderwebbing across the pristine walls, shadows moving as if alive, trying to seep through the cracks. Oh God, they're testing the walls. The waitress shrieked, every word steeped in panic. What do we do? Steve demanded, feeling the floor tremble underfoot. There's a way to stop this, but it involves a sacrifice. Someone will have to confront them, draw them away, and give them what they crave, Paul said, trembling. Are you insane? Steve shouted, realization dawning too late. You can't mean it's the only way. Paul's desperation morphed into determination. If I confront them, I can make them accept a trade. I can buy us time. No. I want to let you do that. But Paul's expression was resolute. You don't understand the depth of this horror. If we do nothing, it won't end here. They'll come for everyone we know. Steve's heart pounded, clashing with the knowledge that it might come down to Paul's life or all of theirs. As the shadows clawed at the church walls, they understood. The real question wasn't just about survival, it was whether they were willing to pay the ultimate price for freedom. With the silence thickening, the church felt like a cage. The truth hung heavy between them. What would they sacrifice to make it out alive? Amidst the tension, an eerie howl rose outside, shaking the very foundation of their sanctuary. And then, the lights began to flicker, as shadows surged, eager for a feast. What lay in wait beyond their fragile barrier? The flickering lights plunged them into brief darkness, heartbeat rhythmically matching the pulsing electric hum. The shadows outside screeched like banshees, clawing at the very essence of their sanctuary. Steve felt his throat tighten. This wasn't just fear. It was survival instinct screaming for an escape, but there was none. Paul! He shouted, the accusation burning behind his eyes. You think you can just sacrifice yourself? What about us? We're not just going to stand by. Stop! Paul's voice was sharp, cutting through the chaos. He stepped away from the altar, swaying as if a gust was pushing him back. You have no idea what I'm up against. They won't just give up if I don't do this. The waitress, still crouched low, looked between them, panic etched on her face. But why did you do it in the first place? What kind of price did you pay? Her voice trembled, barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would invite danger. Paul's breath hitched. He spoke slowly, each word dripping with regret. They found me when I was lost, desperate. I thought it was just a way to survive, to bargain for something I could control. But it grew into a hunger I never anticipated, a fever I couldn't shake. But you could have told us. Steve was shouting now, the frustration boiling over. You didn't have to drag us into this nightmare, Paul. The walls shuddered again, cracks widening, and shadowy fingers slipped through. The waitress shrieked. They're coming. We need to do something. Look, we can't fall apart now. Paul raised his hands, urgency flooding his tone. We must act as one. This won't end unless we fight back. If I just know. You don't need to sacrifice yourself. Steve's voice cracked, straining against the weight of disbelief. This isn't about heroism, it's about survival. We can find another way. Another thud reverberated through the building, causing the stained glass to tremble ominously. The soft tinkling of glass played a discordant tune as a piece shattered, raining down tiny colorful shards. It felt like the church was unraveling before their eyes, the safety they sought slipping away with every moment they spent arguing. Paul looked toward the altar, a horrifying realization converging in his expression. I have to distract them. Draw them away. It's the only way to keep the rest of you safe. The waitress grabbed his arm, desperation sparking in her eyes. We can't just let you go out there. What if it's a lie? What if it's all part of their game? It doesn't matter. Paul snapped, a flicker of anger igniting his fear. If I don't confront them, their claws will dig deeper. It's already begun. The shadows thickened, twisting into dark, monstrous forms. Steve felt like his chest was on fire, suffocation approaching as they began to entwine around his thoughts. The walls seemed to pulse with the creature's hunger. He clenched his jaw, gazing at Paul, who was now backing toward the altar, resolve blossoming into grim acceptance. How do you even know this will work? Steve questioned, his voice low, unsteady with dread. Because they accept a trade. Paul said, panic merging with determination. I've seen it. They want souls, and while I'm guilty of orchestrating the chaos, there's still some good left in me. Maybe I can offer them what they seek in exchange for life. Don't do this. The waitress cried, tears glistening in her eyes. We can fight them together. We have to. But Paul's mind was made up. I have to do this. It's the only way to keep you safe. I can draw them out, give us time to escape. Paul, no. But his voice was drowned out by a deafening roar rising from the shadows, the air vibrating with palpable terror. Go to the back. He shouted, pushing both of them away as he turned to face the altar. Don't wait. Get behind the barriers. Now. As he shouted, the shadows surged forward, their wild appetites unleashed. A wave of darkness crashed against Paul as he stepped forward, determined that a scream pierced the air, not of a human, but a raw cry soaked in otherworldly malice, and in that moment of chaotic desperation, their fates intertwined, leaving one question piercing like lightning: would they find the courage to confront the darkness, or would they become its next meal? As the shadows surged again, the stained glass began to splinter. What would it cost for one to save all? The moment felt surreal, like suspended animation warped in a nightmare. The floor rumbled beneath them, shaking as if the very foundations of the church were teetering on collapse. Paul stood at the altar, a lone figure against the mounting dark. Paul! Steve screamed, voice breaking, but it was swallowed by the enraged shadows rolling toward them, like a thick fog swirling with malicious intent. The waitress clutched Steve's arm, breathing heavily, eyes darting around as if searching for salvation. What if he's wrong? What if this is it? Steve couldn't answer. His heart pounded louder than the growls of darkness, its rhythm echoing the fear coursing through his veins. We need to do something, anything. But all he could hear was the infernal chanting rising from the abyss. Paul's shoulders squared as he faced the encroaching storm, determination hardening his features. I will give them what they want. He yelled, more to himself than to them. I want to let them touch you. Paul, you don't have to. Steve shouted, desperation bubbling over. This isn't the answer. But each word felt weak against the terror enveloping them. With a sudden, grounded breath, Paul reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, battered charm, its surface blackened and cracked. It was a token from his past, something he'd clung to in his descent into this madness. This will buy me time. Trust me. As if sensing the shift, the shadows writhed, a cacophony of hisses and growls echoing in the air. Paul stepped closer to the altar, lifting the charm high. Take me. Take this offering, and spare the rest. There was a moment, a heartbeat stretched thin before reality snapped like a taut wire. The shadows paused, and a low whisper tinged with twisted malice spiraled from their depths. It curled around them like smoke. Offerings do not come without cost. In that instant, the waitress screamed, recoiling as shadowy hands reached out, clawing for Paul. She tightened her grip on Steve as he yanked her back, the shadows momentarily lunging at Paul, who stood resolute, the charm pulsing with a ghastly glow. What are they saying? She gasped, clutching Steve's arm tighter, nails digging into skin. They want more. They always want more, Steve murmured, the bitter realization crashing down around them. As the shadows coiled and twisted, hellish laughter broke through the choking darkness. Paul's face blanched. No, no, this can't be. I can't offer more. I want tea. The shadows grew ferocious, swarming like a hurricane intent on claiming its prey. A guttural laughter erupted, mocking his desperation. You are a slave to your own choices, Paul. A slave to us. Panic ignited within Steve. You need to run. He shouted, pushing the waitress behind him for protection. We have to get out of here. No. Paul hollered, stepping further into the darkened altar. You can't. I have to do this. The air crackled with an electric tension as the shadows surged again, their hunger palpable, echoing through the crumbling church. The waitress grabbed Steve, her eyes wide with fear. What is happening? What does he mean, slave? For the love of God, we can't spend more time talking. Steve pressed, shoving her toward the back. Let us go. Now. Just then, Paul's shriek split the air as a horde of shadows climbed him like vines. A burst of unfathomable strength wrestled within him, and he fought against the losing tide. Get out. Save yourselves. But the church trembled, and the chilling realization swept over them. Paul's sacrifice demanded a price far greater than either of them could fathom. With every ounce of desperation, Steve yanked the waitress toward an exit. This isn't over, Paul. We will find you. But as they burst through the door into the blinding light, a final scream echoed down the halls, swallowed by the insatiable darkness behind them. What are we even running to? The waitress sobbed, her face pale. I don't know, Steve admitted, heart racing. But we can't stop now. We have to find a way to stop them before it's too late. The night stretched ominously around them, shadows creeping ever closer, and with each step, he could hear Paul's anguished cries trailing behind them, haunting him, like a ghost that wouldn't let go. What had they awakened? What awaited in the shadows as they fled? The streets outside the church felt like a different world, but the weight of terror clung heavily to Steve and the waitress. The air was thick with dread, as if the darkness itself had seeped from the church, wrapping around them, invading their very pores. What do we do now? She gasped, running wide-eyed as if the shadows were right behind her, ready to pull her back into the void. Steve looked around, desperate for answers, but the streetlights flickered ominously, illuminating nothing but fear and uncertainty. We need to find a place to hide. Somewhere safe. Then we can figure out what to do next. The waitress stumbled slightly, her legs trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline and horror. Safe. How can we be safe when her voice trailed off? She couldn't finish the thought, and the silence that followed felt heavy. He reached out, gripping her shoulder. Listen, we can't let Paul's sacrifice be in vain. We need to find a way to fight this. We can't just run forever. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. But what if those things come for us? What if they're stronger than we are? With every question she asked, the shadows seemed to close in tighter. We won't let that happen, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. We'll find help. Someone has to know what's going on. They hurried down the street, the echo of their footsteps swallowed by the eerie stillness of the night. Each shadow that danced in the periphery sent shivers down their spines. The waitress glanced back nervously, her breath hitching. What if they follow us? What if this is just the beginning? Steve's stomach churned, but he forced himself to keep moving. Then we'll face it together. Whatever it is, we'll deal with it. As they rounded a corner, Steve's heart dropped. A figure stood in the dim light of the next intersection. Who is that? The waitress whispered, clutching his arm tightly. Steve squinted into the shadows. I don't know. But we need to find out. He took a cautious step forward, and the figure stepped into the light. It was an older man with deep-set eyes that flickered with knowledge and a hint of madness. Run! He shouted, raising his hands in warning. You don't understand what's coming. Wait! Steve yelled back, instinctively stopping. We need answers. Please. The urgency in his voice cut through the fear. The man's eyes darted to the street behind them, panic flashing across his face. You think you can run from this? You think it ends with your friend? No, it's only just begun. What do you mean? The waitress nearly shouted, voice shaking. What is happening? The shadows, they're hungry. They take what you love most, the man said, his voice trembling. And they won't stop until they get it all. Steve's mind raced, piecing fragments together. You know about Paul? I've seen this before, the man muttered, his expression fading into sorrow. You need to stop it before it consumes him. What do we do? Steve urged, every word like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. Find the source, the man began, but before he could finish, a low growl erupted from the shadows. They turned, faces paling as dark shapes surged forward, sweeping like fog, clawing toward them. Run! The man screamed, his voice swallowed by the howling darkness. Steve grabbed the waitress's hand without hesitation, and they sprinted back the way they came, hearts pounding in unison. The shapes moved faster, slipping through the air, reaching for them with twitching fingers. Steve! She panted, glancing back as a shadow lunged closer. What now? Find someplace where the light is strong. He shouted, dragging her toward the flickering lights of a nearby diner, praying they could make it. Suddenly, a brilliant flash illuminated the night, blinding for a moment before the shadows recoiled, hissing like scalded creatures. It came from the diner. What on earth? Steve breathed. They burst through the door and skidded to a halt, eyes wide. The diner was packed, but the patrons were frozen, faces twisted in fear, staring at an inexplicable phenomenon in the center of the room. A figure, cloaked in white, stood there, glimmering with a strange, comforting light. Who are you? Steve shouted over the din of confusion. Your only hope, the figure replied, voice steady as the shadows loomed just outside, hungry. The waitress turned to Steve, half hopeful, half terrified. Do you think they can help? Before he could respond, the lights flickered violently. This fight is far from over, the figure warned, and just like that, the shadows surged forward, crashing against the door, testing their resolve. Steve felt a surge of determination. Let us see what they have to say. But the question remained, what price would they have to pay to stop the darkness? And could they truly trust the light amidst the lurking gloom? The diner felt like a battleground, throbbing with tension as the shadows continued to strike against the door. Steve's pulse raced as he gripped his friend's hand, grounding himself amidst the chaos. The figure cloaked in white stood steady, an unwavering beacon against the encroaching darkness. Are you here to help us? Steve shouted, urgency piercing through the noise. The figure tilted their head and replied softly, I am the keeper. I am here to guide you. Guide us where? The waitress panted, eyes darting nervously. To confront the shadows, the keeper said, voice calm yet heavy with purpose. They have come for Paul, and through him, they seek to reclaim what you have taken from them, hope, love, the essence of your bonds. It's time to reclaim your friend. What do we need to do? Steve asked, determination flowing through him. The keeper gestured toward the back of the diner where a strange glow emanated from a closed door. Within lies a path. You must enter and confront the depths of your fears to save him. The light will shield you for a time. No way. Are you asking us to walk right into danger? The waitress protested. True safety lies in facing the darkness, the keeper replied, unwavering. The air in the diner thickened, the shadows clamoring louder, desperate to engulf them. A crack echoed from the door, sending waves of panic crashing through the diner. Steve's hand tightened around the waitress. No more running. We've lost too much already. The keeper nodded solemnly, urging them to act, without another moment of hesitation, Steve pulled the waitress toward the door. The brightness enveloped them as they pushed through, leaving the din of fearful whispers behind. They stepped into a swirling mist that swallowed the light, the atmosphere electric with tension. "I can't believe we're doing this," the waitress whispered, fear clinging to her voice. "We don't have a choice," Steve said, heart pounding. Somewhere in the distance, he sensed Paul's presence, distant, yet palpable. Together, they moved deeper into the fog, feeling its cold grip around their lungs. The air crackled as whispers danced at the edges of their consciousness, haunting echoes of fears long buried. "Remember why we're here," Steve said, squeezing the waitress's hand. "We have to bring Paul back." Suddenly, the mist cleared, revealing a chamber filled with flickering shadows, wails of longing wrapped around them. At the center stood Paul, bound by chains of darkness, his face pale but resolute. "No. Stay back," he shouted, voice strained. "They shouldn't have followed you here." Steve stepped forward, heart heavy with urgency. "We're not leaving without you. Why didn't you listen?" Paul cried, the shadows writhed around him, twisting tighter. "It's too late for me. You don't understand." The waitress pressed forward beside Steve. "We can't lose you. You have to fight with us." "Fight? Fight against what?" Paul's expression twisted in pain. "They want to stop. They want to let me go. Then we'll face them together," Steve declared, voice rising above the chaos. Suddenly, the shadows surged toward them, coiling around the trio, whispering secrets of despair and doubt, trying to pull them apart. "Look around you," they hissed, "He's lost. You can't save what has already been claimed." "No. You're wrong," Steve shouted, his voice echoing defiantly against the shadows. "You are not stronger than our bond." The chamber trembled as shadows recoiled, sensing their unity, losing ground. Paul's eyes widened, and he began to fight against the chains binding him. "I can feel you. Please, pull me closer together," the waitress shouted as they reached for Paul, each link of darkness ramping up the battle. As their fingers brushed against Paul's, a blinding light surged from the core of their connection, sending a shockwave through the haze, shattering the bonds holding him. The shadows screeched, wailing, as they began to dissipate. Desperation filled the air, swirling fiercely. "Offerings do not come without a cost," the shadows screamed, desperately clawing at the light surrounding them. "Let me go," Paul cried, and with that, the trio moved closer, sealing their decision. "Take me instead. We'll make the sacrifice together," Steve shouted, stepping forward. "No." Both Paul and the waitress yelled, their determination overwhelmed the shadows, sending them reeling. The moment felt stretched, as if time itself had paused, hovering on the brink of destiny. The shadows began to dissolve, but the heaviness returned, pulling harder, desperate to claw back. "A soul for a soul," the shadows reminded, their whispers agile, wrapping tighter around them. "No," Paul shouted, pushing away the darkness. "You will not have us. I refuse to be your pawn any longer." With his newfound strength, Paul pulled the light closer, igniting it in a blazing fury that clashed against the shadows. "Now," the waitress urged, drawing the energy to a focal point. They held hands, heartbeats synchronized, channeling everything they had into one last push, drawing on their bond. The light erupted, an explosion of hope vibrant against despair as the shadows let out one final wail that echoed through the chamber, and in that fiery brilliance, darkness began to dissipate, unraveling at the seams until nothing remained but silence and stillness. The trio collapsed to the ground, breaths heavy but relieved. Is it over?" the waitress panted, looking at Paul, who appeared changed, as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders. I think so," Paul replied, trembling but resolute. They exchanged glances full of understanding, a silent promise binding them. "Together," Steve declared, firm in their resurgence. "We face whatever comes next together." As dawn broke outside, Casting light across their weary faces, they rose not just as survivors, but as comrades enriched by a bond unbroken. They had faced the shadows, fought them, and defeated the entrapment that had threatened to consume them. Now, the journey wouldn't end here, it was only the beginning. And together, they would find a way forward. In the reflection of the rising sun, they took their first steps into a new dawn filled with hope, but one thing was certain, they would be ready this time. You need to subscribe now so you don't miss the next exclusive stories. Smash the like button now to feed the algorithm. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this wild conclusion. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this epic ending. Your support means everything.